Hey everyone, Dr. Holly Jordan here. Before we jump into the interview, just give me 2 seconds of your time so I can put it into context. So, this interview came about as a result of my research for my All the World's a Stage video, which, if you have not watched that deep dive into All the World's a Stage and the Prime Directive questions it asks, I highly recommend you go do so now before you watch this interview because a lot of what we talk about is explained in more detail in that video and we just kind of reference it here. So, with all that said, when I was doing research for that video, I realized that there were some things I just couldn't answer. So I reached out to Aaron Waltke, who wrote the episode and was the co executive producer and co head writer for Prodigy. And he said he'd be willing to talk to me, which was awesome. So, what you're about to see is that interview. It really starts with just his origins into Star Trek, his time on Prodigy, looking at this episode specifically, and then some just general fun questions I wanted to ask him at the end. So please go watch, enjoy, and remember, production quality gets better over time, and I taped this in July. So I'm not going to say anything else about that, but anyways, be kind and enjoy.
Thank you, of course, so much for being here. It meant the world that you got back to me in about 4 seconds. Like, that was so nice that I didn't have to sit there going, oh God. So, thank you. Let's just kind of dive into your origin story because I'm looking through your credits just for Prodigy at this point. The Kobayashi Maru episode, The Devourer of All Things, all the world's a stage. You are clearly pulling deep cuts from the canon, and it's so obvious that you have such a love for this franchise. So, like, what was your entry point? How'd you get into it?
Interesting. So you're asking what my first contact with Star
Yeah.
Trek. Yeah, it's funny. I told Kate Mulgrew this, where she was like, "So have you always been like, when did you become a fan?" And I honestly can't think of a time in my life that it wasn't like part of my life because my dad was a Trekkie. Like he watched the original series in college, and I think as far as like science fiction goes, like he thought that was a great accessible entry point for me. And so that was a big bonding sort of thing for us was watching Star Trek together and then like in the summers I would during the day I would stay at my aunt's house and she would throw on our local PBS affiliate mysteriously aired TOS reruns. So
Nice.
I would just watch. She thought it would be educational, and I guess it was in a certain sense, but it was very much just, that was one of my first exposures to like jet age science fiction.
Love it.
And I don't know what this is, but I can't stop watching it. And then TNG, I was a child of the 80s and 90s. And so TNG was sort of my gateway in addition to what I of TOS I saw at my aunt's house. Um, and my dad, we some of the first movies I saw in the theater that weren't, like Disney animated features or whatever were Star Trek movies. Whenever the new TNG movies would come out, we'd watch them together. So that, it was always kind of baked into my mental DNA, as it were. And especially in like middle school and high school or what have you, my local Fox affiliate every day after school, starting right at like, I don't know, 3:30 or something or 4 p.m., they would just do a 2 hour block of Star Trek. And
Yep.
so they they originally they were airing all of TNG in broadcast order, and then when they ran out, they switched over and started airing Deep Space Nine in broadcast order. And so, I didn't have the wherewithal to record with a VHS. So, some people were proud of their home recorded VHS libraries that they would record every single episode of Deep Space Nine. But for me, I just watched it as it was live on the air every day, it was so funny finding out after the fact because I wasn't like on the Usenet forums or whatever,
Right.
but I know a lot of fans initially. Obviously, Deep Space Nine is profoundly appreciated now, um, but at the time, apparently there was a lot of people complaining like, "Oh, it was so heavily serialized. What if you miss an episode? Like you have no idea what's going on, they're on a space station, they're not on a starship. But I missed all that, and I just effectively binge watched it in a time when that wasn't a word, and I was like, "This is amazing Star Trek. I've never seen anything like this." And so that was kind of my gateway, were those three shows, and then obviously Voyager came along, and I got into that as it was ramping up, and Enterprise, and then there was the Dark Ages, where there was a stretch a few years where just there was no Star Trek, and it seemed like it was just as I was graduating college, and I was so excited to try to pursue a career in entertainment that all the articles were saying like Star Trek is dead. I was like, oh, well, okay, I guess I'm not working on Star Trek. But sure enough, the J.J. Abrams movies rejuvenated the kind of interest in the franchise, and which gave way to Discovery, which in turn gave way to this whole third wave of new Star Trek. And I was lucky enough to kind of be in the right place in the right time with the right knowledge and appreciation of the franchise that the Hageman brothers had sold. I had worked with them on a show called Troll Hunters,
Hmm.
and we were collaborating in the third installment of that trilogy. They were writing the movie that was going to be the capstone to the series, and I was writing the final TV installment of it and show running. And so we were in a bunch of meetings with Guillermo del Toro together, and they had offices like literally down the hall from mine at DreamWorks. And and we'd pop in and say hi to each other or whatever. And then at one point, they they just said, "Hey, you like Star Trek, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I do," because I would reference it constantly. Because I didn't realize how encyclopedic of a knowledge I had of Star Trek until I started talking to other people who didn't have that kind of knowledge about TV shows. I was like, oh, I guess I am kind of a Trek expert. um, but it was not something that I like went out of my way to perfect or anything like that. It was just these were the TV shows for me growing up, and I watched every one of them, and so much of my knowledge of Star Trek feels almost intuitive, where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is how a warp drive works, and then I would go online and be like, is this how a warp drive works? And then I'd find a Reddit thread from 7 years ago that had like basically 1,000 comments from fellow Trekkies that were all saying, yes, this is how it works and this is why. And then they'd point to the episodes explaining why I thought that. And I was like, great, perfect. And that
So
was it's
you're
just super saturated in my soul.
so you're Brandon from Galaxy Quest, is what I'm hearing at this point.
Essentially, I'm the
Well,
Justin Long character.
perfect, because so am I. So no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So you mentioned a little bit in there, you just kind of got pulled into it, but was it a goal to work on Star Trek in spite of that dark period when you come out into your career and all of a sudden there's no Trek? Like, were you really in the back of your head hoping that like this would be your home at some point?
I I think I was almost afraid to wish that, because I was just concentrating on like trying to get into writing for TV and film and something that resembled Star Trek or Lord of the Rings or all the things that I held very dear and beloved to my heart. And so I was lucky that I was able to kind of find my tribe, as it were,
Yeah.
in fantasy and science fiction and genre, a lot of which was I happened to be at the forefront of this new wave of CGI animation that was like sort of high-end Pixar quality animation, but on a TV budget. And the reason that was even possible is like just the way that all technology works, where, it'll be a lot of money will be put into the researching in military budgets, for instance, of how to work satellites or whatever. And then 10 years later, it trickles down into the public sphere, and then now we all get GPSs in our cars, right?
Right.
So something similar happened with CGI animated technology, where a lot of the stuff that was used, to make Pixar movies in 2006 and 2007 or whatever, which look great, it's like Ratatouille and fantastic films. eventually that technology kind of trickled down, and then by the time I started working in that field in television around 2013 or 2014, it like just became cheap enough that you can make television that looked really solid in that sort of in that high-end animated format on a TV production pipeline. And so the first TV show I worked on that was fully, produced and went into production was the show Troll Hunters from Guillermo del Toro and Netflix. And I'm this is not me bragging. It just seems to be a
No,
true
brag,
history
brag.
that that we kind of like reinvented that space a little bit, and now ever since it's been kind of like the world that Troll Hunters kind of built of like, oh, we want it to look like Troll Hunters or better. And I still hear compare. It's funny hearing comparisons like that whenever somebody comes out with this, what they call a sort of a AAA animated CGI show.
Mhm.
They're like, oh, it's going to be like Troll Hunters, and I'm like, okay,
That's so
but
cool.
it was so that was I was very grateful to be able to work in the fantasy and science fiction space. So then when the stars aligned, I happened to have had just enough experience in
Mhm.
that space that when they wanted to do a high-end CGI AAA animated Star Trek show, I was like, I'm here.
Yeah,
Put me in
really.
code.
I volunteer as tribute. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Oh, this is
We who are about to
fascinating.
trek salute you.
Yes. And it's amazing you say that because there are times watching Prodigy where I forget I'm watching an animated series. Like
Yeah.
especially like the space shots look better than the space shots in TNG, obviously. Like, it's so stunning and it's so immersive because of that. Like if you can forget you're watching a cartoon, that is incredibly beautiful art. And I'm glad to hear that you've been such a part of bringing that to us. That's amazing.
Yeah, I am proud that I contributed a small bit to this sort of like new age of animation we're in.
Yeah, that's cool. So speaking of kind of newer ages of animation, y'all make this show that's a Nickelodeon show. But Nickelodeon has burned us before in terms of things that are supposed to be kids shows that rip adults' hearts out. And Prodigy has found a way to do this. It's like old school Don Bluth movies versus Disney movies. Like Land Before Time as a kid is wonderful. As an adult, you have snot pouring out of your nose, right? Like there have been
Yeah.
moments of Prodigy that have meant that much because they are just they it doesn't assume the youth of the audience. You guys present it in a way that is approachable to younger people, but you don't talk down to them. And that's been the beauty of Star Trek from day one. So how did you guys go into the writer's room or just even farther back storyboarding things out to kind of strike this balance between speaking to the hardcore Trekkies that are going to be like, it's animated, I don't want to watch this because they didn't watch the animated series back in the 70s either, right? Like, how did you make this balance work so well?
Yeah, well, I won't lie that it was a very tricky tightrope to
I'm sure.
walk. But I think just because many of us that were on the writing staff had done similar stuff before, where we ultimately we what we always think back to are like what they call four quadrant movies that were especially popular when I was a kid. That those are movies like made by Amblin, like
Mm-hmm.
E.T. or Jurassic Park, or to a certain degree like Terminator or something, like or Predator, where there's like something in it for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jurassic Park, the kids are like, "Wow, dinosaurs," and then the parents are like, "Oh, wow, it's about this guy, Professor Grant, that's like grappling with middle age and whether what he missed out on not having a family," you know. But then ultimately, everybody went on. For some people, it's an adventure movie. For some people, it's like a stealth horror film. It kind of has little elements of everything that when you walk out of it, everybody was like that wanted what a ride I just went on. And I think if you can tap into that specific tone,
Mm-hmm.
that then I think the aforementioned Pixar is a great example of that, where there's a lot of people even now that at least in America that are like are afraid to say that they watched an animated film, but then they might say, oh, but it was a Pixar movie, and then everyone goes, oh, okay, okay.
Oh, yeah.
And what's funny is like America is sort of unique in that Europe and Japan and
Yeah.
everywhere else have long recognized that animation works great just as a medium. It's not a genre. Um, and animation can contain multitudes as far as like who it's for, what it's about, whether it's adult or whether it's just for kids, or you can tell all kinds of stories. And the drum beat we've always been marching to has been, let's try to find those four quadrant stories that appeal to everybody. Um, and so, at the beginning, there was a little bit of push and pull between like, is this more of a Nickelodeon show? Is this more of a Star Trek show? And then eventually both sides are like, well, you tell us what it is.
Perfect.
Right. So I think we really kind of found our footing after a couple of episodes, and we reassured the Nickelodeon crowd that there would be humor in it. So it would be super serious, but there would also be some action and like some crunchy science fiction and idealism for the Star Trek hardcore fans, and thankfully, like we knew that we'd be all right in the end anyway, because we always had that beautiful like built-in story engine of, this is people who know nothing about the Federation or its ideals, that have kind of set their North Star to Starfleet. And as the show progresses, they will eventually be able to reshape themselves like unmolded clay into their idealized selves by utilizing all of the sort of utopian Maslow's hierarchy of needs fulfilled that the Federation promises. And so that was it was built in of like, oh, it's already like a Bildungsroman, but the Bildungsroman starts from, what if you took somebody who was not Starfleet material on their surface and provided them guidance and providence so that they would be able to self-actualize and eventually become their better selves, which at its heart is what Star Trek always is about. Is like, it's not about being perfect. It's about striving, whether literally or figuratively. And that's we found our groove, and I think I see that comment all the time online of people like, I first I thought it was a Star Trek show, and then after a few episodes I was like, hey, this is actually pretty good. And then I was bawling my eyes out by episode 10, and then I was super invested by episode 20. And it's just like and I think there was one critic who described it as a magic trick, where at first it starts out completely unfamiliar, and you don't recognize hardly anything Star Trek in it, and then gradually we introduce these sort of subtle themes, the building blocks of what makes Star Trek great, and very, very subtly pull the thread right at the end, and suddenly it comes together, and it's like the most Star Trek show that's ever trekked.
And it really is. I mean, it could have been so easy to just hit us over the head with, this is Starfleet and you guys are going to learn and you're going to be in a class and you're going to, no, but they learn through doing, which
Yeah.
as a former professor, that's how kids learn. They learn through doing. They don't learn through being talked at. And I, as you know, same deal, grew up with a TOS dad, watched it on the sci-fi reruns, taped it off the TV, and had like a little thing written down so we could find which tape it was on when we wanted to watch it. Like, it's in me too. And so to watch those, especially like that first 10, you guys were really trying to introduce it. It didn't feel like things I already knew. Like, you all managed to find a different way to say it. And I think having it come through hologram, Janeway's voice, it was a voice that was very comforting to those of us who grew up with Voyager, but it also, one, you gave her boldly go speech. Thank you. She needed to have it. Oh my God. Like, when that happened, I was just like, she's doing it too. But you guys helped to remind me why the Federation is important, why Star Trek is important. And when my nieces and nephews get old enough, I cannot wait to watch this with them, because it's gonna be a lot of me like staring at them going like, oh my God, are they gonna laugh at the right parts, right? But it's it's wonderful that, if nothing else, the newer iterations of Trek, there's an entry point for everybody. this time around, whether it's the kids show, whether it's bringing back the old guard, getting into strange new worlds, but telling new stories with those wonderful franchise characters. So yeah, y'all did good. I mean, that wasn't really a question, but it was me pontificating, but y'all did good.
Oh,
Um,
on behalf of the crew, thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, Christ, their first away mission, you guys dropped them on an M-class planet that's trying to eat them. You guys made the stakes high from the first moment, and it never let up. And Star Trek is always kind of mocked a little bit for always having terrible first seasons, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true.
Code of Honor is out there, right? Like we don't talk about it, but it's out there. Prodigy didn't have that problem. And that is, that's a testament to your all's writing room, your guys' showrunners, the vision y'all had for it, and apparently Nickelodeon kind of letting you do your own thing a little bit too on top of it. So that's cool.
Yeah. It was, I think all TV shows always take a second just to kind of find their footing. I'm glad that we found our footing fairly quickly. Just by the mechanics of, it's a new, you're still, you have the pilot, and the premise, but you're still testing out what stories work, what the character dynamics are, and especially once you have the actors' voices in there, like playing to their strengths and discovering things. But what was interesting with Star Trek is like we already had a structure there from the beginning of
Right.
like, how do we break down Star Trek to its fundamental elements and then use that to explore character, which is, always what Star Trek is like at its best. But taking like if we basically started from a ground one, like if you had to explain like the top 10 coolest things about Star Trek to someone who had no idea what you were talking about, how would you do it in a way that was actionable and dramatizable, and that thankfully gave us a nice structure, and even with characters, right, we were able to take the sort of the archetypes of like the brash engineer or the can-do captain and kind of turn them on their head of just like, well, let's show what happens when a captain doesn't have these attributes and why they need them.
I also love that because it's animated, y'all are able to get some of the aliens that are harder to do with prosthetics in, and you're not having to worry about poor actors having to be in the chair for 4 hours before they even get to sit there for 8 hours before they go on camera, right? So getting the
Yeah.
Tellarites in there, doll would not be an easy makeup job if you were doing that live action,
No.
So
But Brett Gray said he's willing to sit in the chair if they ever bring him back. He wants to do it.
awesome. Oh my God, I would love a live action. That would be so amazing. But yeah, was that something you all thought about? Was like, what can we explore that animation makes easier to explore?
Yeah, I think we quickly identified, we knew we would be facing the question, why does this need to be animated? And I think for us, we wanted to lean into the strengths of the animated medium of what can we do that the live shows can't, but still would feel right at home in the Star Trek universe. And there's tiny little flourishes of where Star Trek has really tried to push the design language of things. Like, you see it a little bit in like Species 8472 and
Yeah.
Voyager, which is supposed to be like a truly alien sort of look, but because they were obviously limited by the limitations of their time, they could only show it for like 5 seconds at a time, and, and then you could see them burning through their budget with every effect shot showing these things. But now, here we are 20 years later, and that's not so hard for us to generate, especially on a show where every shot is sort of an animated shot. So we always wanted to try to lean into our strengths, and also just with the crew. For a long time, there's been a pretty vocal minority of fans who have said, like, when can we get a all non-human crew? Because, like, obviously the Federation has 130 alien planets, and most of the crews we've had have been like humans plus maybe one or two aliens. And could we ever see the inverse? And so that was an exciting opportunity as well to kind of pluck from the most obscure reaches
Yeah.
of the Trek universe and cobble them all together and say, can they be a crew? And the answer is yes.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right, so maybe let's move into the episode I'm writing an article about. All the world is stage. What was the brainchild behind this episode?
Well, it's interesting because they say great minds think alike, or that there's parallel evolution where you kind of arrive at the same form of something, but through totally different means. And after we had made the episode or started making the episode, I was like, why does this feel right? And then I remembered that I had read somewhere that I think it was Ron Moore for the episode that eventually became Trials and Tribulations on
Mm-hmm.
Deep Space Nine. That was originally going to be a return to the piece of the action planet. and, and I was shocked after I saw that. I was like, wait, what? Because if you remember in Piece of the Action and
Yeah.
the original series, they go there and it's been culturally contaminated by a history book on the
Chicago
history
mobsters. Yeah.
of gangland Chicago. And so then they arrive and it's the mobster planet. And then they have to hold like Gatling guns and dress up and there's pinstripe suits or whatever. I'm like, yeah, see? And it
So
was
good.
like wonderfully crazy premise that is burned into my brain forever. But at the very end of it, in the classic, almost Twilight Zone-y kind of ending, they realize they left a tricorder behind, and they're like, "That'll be fine, right?" And Ron Moore's idea was that they would return to that planet and you would find it would be this weird amalgam of gangland Chicago, like Al Capone, but also mixed with Starfleet, like Starfleet ideals, which, that I can see why they backed away from that because it was like, that's like so many hats on hats of ideas, but it's a cool premise. Like I would have watched the hell out of that.
Oh yeah.
But I think the what I'm getting at with the sort of parallel evolution is that I think the idea, the very premise of cultural contamination is sort of like this curious thing that seems simple on its face, but then becomes more convoluted and complex and thorny of an issue the more you delve into it. And it's tied in with the whole prime directive idea. And the prime directive is sort of like a deceptively complex debate to be had about whether to leave alien civilizations alone or uncontacted cultures alone, or if you do believe that you should leave other contacts alone, when if ever are you supposed to contact them? When are you supposed to meet alien life? When is it okay? Um, and I think Star Trek could kind of mostly answer that of saying like anytime it's before they've reached a certain level of technology, it's almost always bad. Like it just goes poorly. But we were like that, I don't know if that's totally true. I think it would just be there are probably instances where it would just make things different, not and not apocalyptic
Right.
necessarily. And it kind of left us thinking like, well, what about some of those alien cultures that met Starfleet? Like, how would that how would those encounters go? Uh, Zooming forward 120, 130 years later. And I was specifically thinking about that, that end of Piece of the Action. I was just because as a kid, that episode haunted me. And I was like, well, what about the tricorder? And I puzzled that out a lot of like, what is, why would it be inherently bad if someone was exposed to the ideals of Starfleet? And I came to the conclusion that it wouldn't necessarily be that way. But it would probably evolve, and it would change the trajectory of the civilization. So when we were sort of brainstorming for the first season, one of our writers, Deandra Pendleton Thompson, came in with an idea that and I believe it was the title was All the World's a Stage, and she just had one line, which was just like a nugget of an idea, which was like, they arrive at a planet and everybody is acting out captain's logs. And that kind of set the room spinning where we're just like, well, why would that be? What would be the circumstances? And that's when my brain started worrying and I was like, well, maybe it was a cultural contamination thing. As I said, I thought about that stuff a lot when I was a kid. But then the question would be, why would they just be reenacting these logs? How would they have gotten them? And then I think the Benson sisters or someone, chimed in and said like, what if it was the original, like it was from like the TOS era, a ship, and then I think I chimed in and was like, what if it was the Enterprise? Because it's a 5-year mission, and I think we only saw 3 of them. What if we are revisiting one of these planets as is quite well known amongst the Star Trek fandom, in the TOS days, they were a little more cavalier with Prime First Contact and the Prime Directive. So, and they were always leaving red shirts behind. And then it brought us to that really interesting idea of like, well, what if one of those red shirts survived? And so it's this really fun kind of like very fulminating creative milieu of all these sort of interesting uh, questions that all started pointing and filling in the gaps and pretty organically to build this story out. And then the question of was like, well, do we invent a red shirt, or like, were there any red shirts that in theory had survived that we could kind of pull from? And then I remembered there was this episode called Obsession in TOS where the famous episode where they fight a dichronium cloud creature that sucks the blood out of red shirts or whatever. And the whole episode is like the A story is about a red shirt who we've never seen before, named Ensign Garrovick, who is guilty that he hesitated, and like one of his crewmates died at the hands of this creature. And then basically the whole episode is like a heart to heart with Kirk, and Kirk saying like, you can't blame yourself. The only thing you did wrong was not following through in spite of your fear. And then sure enough, they go back down and fight the cloud creature together. And then at the end, Ensign Garrick's gone on this whole journey, and you're like ready for him to like sit down and join like the main crew,
Yeah.
just like other characters have in other franchises, or as other iterations of the franchise, where um, and then he's never seen again. Ensign Garrick vanishes from the show, and so that was always something that bothered me a little bit. And I know it's because of just the nature of nobody back then, episodic television being what it was considered a lot more disposable than it is now. And I think they just assumed no one would ever question or wonder where he went, because they would just watch the next one. And the idea of reruns or syndication was kind of a foreign concept at that time. And so, but then it was a great opportunity for us to kind of answer that question of like what happened to Ensign Garrick, and then also leaning into a few other little elements like what happened to the Galileo 2, because if you remember, or what happened to the Galileo, I should say, because if you remember, there was between seasons they were always flying their shuttlecraft as the Galileo, and then I think between season 2 and 3, suddenly it just said Galileo 2. And then you're like, well, what happened to the other one? Because I think it got destroyed a few times, and then it was just, but then they rebuilt it, I guess. But then they switched to Galileo 2. So this was a chance to see what happened to it, so that it was this great kind of assemblage of all these interesting ideas, both for Star Trek lore, but also that sort of these big character questions, and I guess philosophical questions that have been at the heart of Star Trek from the beginning. It was like, how do we tackle that cultural contamination, but from a perspective that Star Trek hasn't seen before? And so that was the genesis of that idea.
Wow. Oh man, thank you for talking me through just like the process, because I think it's really helpful just to know how a room works, and you guys are just pinging these ideas, and
Yeah.
that's so cool. I had actually gone back and watched Obsession too, to be like, what is it about Garrovick that y'all picked up on, possibly, just trying to figure it out. And what's really interesting to me is that Garrovick has a lot of dull qualities. Like, he really cares, but he doesn't always quite know what he's doing. He's willing to listen to people in power once he has to. Like there's a lot there. Like, Garrovick is Starfleet. Like he bleeds it, he believes it. And even Kirk has to be like, you can back off a little bit, kiddo. Like it's okay. Like I make mistakes too. Like you don't, it's not all or
Right.
nothing. And you see Dahl go through that same kind of evolution. Just this episode is so pivotal for his character for me. That it's really great that y'all picked a red shirt that had a similar arc because, like you said, not a lot of them make it to the end of the episode. So
Right.
it's great that you had one that was shockingly fleshed out for what a red shirt typically is. We don't get the lower decks guys as much as we should. We don't get the red shirt perspective. So wow, cool. Thank you. So the green shirts. Is this
Sure.
just because you guys could get away with it because you didn't have to work with green screen?
I think it was that was just me being cheeky, I think, because uh, as I was writing the episode, something that I've always been obsessed with is the sort of the game of telephone that culture always undergoes as
Mm-hmm.
time goes on. Like the spirit of these lasting stories or epic sagas tends to outlast the originals, right? And that goes for things like Beowulf or the prose Edda. The only reason those survive are because curious Christians happen to be like, hey, what were those pagans writing about again? And then they just kind of like wrote down their version of it of events. And in doing so, they kind of add to it. Like I think few people would argue that Beowulf isn't a classic, but I would say it's probably a slightly different version of it than what was being told and passed down through oral tradition 300 years before, 400 years before, 500 years before. But I think that's kind of the beauty of culture and mimetics and ideas is like in the sharing of them, they evolve and shape, and the useful stuff remains while whatever adaptive stuff to make them salient to the time or the culture it grows out into it. And I think with green shirts, that was just one fun little thing of just like I think if you watched a Star Trek viewer watching this was like, why are they wearing green shirts? That's not one of it should be red, blue, or gold. But also, I was like, wouldn't it be fun to kind of tap into the meta joke of the fact that Kirk's shirt was
The
supposed to
tunic.
be green, but then the color cameras made it look gold, and then they just sort of leaned into that, and and so
And then
you
gave
know
him the green shirt later. So they eventually got
yeah,
there
and they
with the
gave it to him
tunic.
later in the casual wear,
Yeah,
and so it becomes this sort of like, is it Starfleet? Is it not? And it just felt like this kind of fun
I
little
love
Easter
it.
eggy type thing.
Yeah,
But at its face, I wanted it to feel slightly wrong, but you can't quite tell. You don't immediately leap onto why, and
yeah.
then as the episode goes on, you realize like, oh, it actually does have a place in kind of the Starfleet canon in a way. And same thing with the badges being slightly crooked and kind of made, stitched together. And all of their terminology is slightly off, Starflight and that sort of thing. Like, I was obsessed with the Mad Max movies when I
Mhm.
was growing up, and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome with like, the long, long ago and the epoxy clips is like permanently tattooed on my brain. So I was fascinated with the idea of like of the ideals of Starfleet. Do they still hold, even if they're not the same verbiage that Starfleet uses? And I wanted it. I think it's a pretty common sort of trope of like don't judge a book by its cover, but in this case I wanted it to be quite literal. Like seems like everything is wrong, but then when you actually go behind the language that has evolved, like they've passed down rather diligently the stuff that matters, and both in like a spiritual or sort of ethical sense or an ethos of Starfleet, but also they diligently passed down via oral tradition and or these bits of training video they had of how to operate a 23rd century starship and that they knew that was important, and even if they didn't totally know why. And I think that was kind of cool, a uh, fun idea to explore because I'm fascinated with how human knowledge and the history of ideas transmits. across the centuries. And this was a chance to do that in sort of a microcosm way.
Yeah, this is the entry point for the study that I'm actually working on because I'm sitting here going, this is a game of telephone. You know,
Yeah.
we're basically the same age. I was born in '85, so like we grew up with the same
Okay, sure.
references and the same, playing stuff on the school bus and whatnot. But my background's in religious studies, and as I was watching this, I'm like, well, this is kind of like the difference between Judaism and Islam. Like in the Quran versus the Torah, I mean, strike that, reverse it. Let me get back for a second because it's a different example, actually. Let me.
Sure.
Christianity and Islam each has a birth narrative of Jesus' story. They are radically different.
Yeah.
Absolutely radically different. Like in Islam, God impregnates Mary with a human baby because God can do whatever he wants. In Christianity, it's half God, half human, but somehow both and not at the same time. And, just all these details are different. Mary's by herself. She's under a date palm. She's wicked mad that she's even pregnant. 9 pound, 12 ounce baby Jesus talks the day after he's born in the Muslim narrative because, like, he is a prophet. But the messages are the same. At the end of the day, Christianity and Islam bring us a prophet that tells us a way to live and live well and live better. And their messages are the same. The details are a little different. Like, does it
Yeah.
matter? Does it matter that they differ if the message is the same? And for me, no, it doesn't matter. For other people who have more literal interpretations of religion, yeah, it matters quite a bit that the narratives are different. But I find it interesting because it tells us the difference between Christian society at its time and Islamic society at its time when these stories were being told and retold. So I
Yeah.
love hearing what you're saying because that's what I tapped into immediately with this episode.
Yeah, and that was definitely a top of mind. And I think even, and I think you could apply that to anything. Like can you see value in Aristotelian ethics even if you don't subscribe to specifically the 12 moral things that Aristotle said we had to
Right.
do? It's like I think there's value to saying there's a balance in all things, right? Which was a sort of he was like find that golden mean between the extremes. Sure. But even in Star Trek, even in popular culture, I should say, I was trying to be a little bit cheeky there because obviously there's when you say what are things that the Mandela effect of that people assume about some of the most popular sci-fi or fantasy franchises, the three that you always hear. Two of them are like Luke, I am your father, which he never said, and Beam me up, Scotty, which he never said, and similarly, like the impersonation of Shatner, right? If you go back and watch TOS, he's like he has some interesting cadence and pauses, but the version of Shatner you see in TOS versus what it has become, which is like this weird copy of a copy of a copy of people going, "I'm in Stardate 574." Like he doesn't do that like that, and yet everybody universally, when they say, "Can you do an impersonation of William Shatner?" they do that, and and yet it's this weird sort of metamorphosis of the pop culture idea of Shatner or Captain Kirk has become outsized, and there's all these threads about, oh, he's such a womanizer and this and that, and he's like, well, he fell in love with some aliens like in maybe 5 episodes, but for the most part he was more of a romantic, I would say. Like he kind of cherished some ideals that were like and fell in love, but I wouldn't say he was like a lecher in the way that he sometimes sometimes is portrayed by people. But I guess my point is like even within pop culture, of which Star Trek is a huge part, this has happened, and I think in some ways I was trying to tap into what that interesting nostalgia and false memory, and you're remembering how you felt when you watched the series. You're not actually remembering the series, and I think that a lot of the strange emotions, good and bad, that are wrapped up in fandom about like authenticity of like that's not the real Superman, or that's not that this isn't canon because I don't like it, that sort of stuff. If you actually want to get logical about it, which in true Spock like form, usually whatever they feel is wrong, like, this breaks canon because the thing goes faster than warp. I'm like, well, there's about 50 episodes of Star Trek in which they go faster than warp using technology other than warp drive, and yet you remember in your the things you remember are this sort of like holistic patchwork of the nostalgia and just things that you liked, and that's the stuff that's most important to you. And I think working in, especially as someone who has now worked in several beloved franchises like Star Trek and Transformers and a few others, you have to be sensitive to those sort of presumptions, but you also have to be willing to explain yourself in a way that they will be open to sort of re-examining their own sort of presumptions about what the thing that they hold so dear can encompass. Because especially a show like Star Trek, which is always about that next horizon, always encountering something new that will make you challenge things about yourself. The last thing I want to see is the fandom gets so crystallized in this sort of assumption of like it can only be these types of stories in this little box in this time period with these types of characters. And Star Trek was never that. But I think because it's been around for 60 years, it's taken on a life of its own. And so these are the things that I was thinking about when I was writing this, of like presumptions of like what fan culture is or could be, why it's important and what it shouldn't be. Like all of those were kind of floating around in my head, against the backdrop of the greater sort of how our own human culture works, and how we tend to through memetics will change ideas, and yet they can branch off and become wildly different things, but they can also be very different from the original, but still retain the core of it. And that I think the latter is what I was. That was kind of my thesis, I suppose. It's just like, the trappings can change a little bit as long as the spirit is there.
And I think you see that the most in the scenes with Dr. Boons, honestly. Like there's that beautiful part where he's just like, you guys must be judging us. Like this hospital isn't what you all have. Like I'm using, dirt and leaves and stuff to heal. Like, why are you taking us seriously? Why are you treating us with this kind of respect? And they're the lifelong fans, right? Like they're the ones that are coming to this, and I just, as much as I loved all the different versions that we got, right? We got James T, which I just like. Oh, Boons. I mean, Bones was always my favorite, honestly, of the original series. I don't know why. I always identified with him the most. So seeing that and just the love for these characters that came through, it didn't feel like caricatures. Yeah, did James T kind of do the Shatner thing? Yeah, but he did it in a way that is way less over the top than most fans do, right? Like it was just there enough. Sool'U, oh, like so good. And you guys pulled in what Fred Tassiori? Is that Tassiori?
I think Fred Tatasciore or
Yeah,
Fred.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's just, you read his IMDb and you're like, oh my God, you've literally done everything. But I mean, to take on those legacy characters, to do the voices so well was just wonderful for me.
Yeah, and we brought in Eric Bauza, who is an amazing guy that
Yeah.
I've known for years, and now he's the voice of a lot of. He's a master impressionist, sort of like one of the heirs to the Mel Blanc. In fact,
Oh,
he is the
wow.
current voice of Bugs Bunny right now.
Okay.
But we brought him in to do the voice of Sulu, and he just like nails it. Um, but yeah, I think that for me, it was fun to kind of like play in that realm of like what people remember about the characters that maybe or may not be real. Like we have Sulu at one point go my, which is sort of like a subtle allusion to him going oh my, which again that's not. I don't think Sulu has ever said
No, it's from
that.
Howard Stern. That
It's
originally happened on Howard Stern.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's all been wrapped up in this
Yeah.
George Takei-ness,
That's
um, and so it was kind of fun, and even the monologue from when they play the logs,
yeah.
when I think I even wrote in the script when he starts to do his star date, he's like star date many moons ago. I said like have it be almost like in the same cadence of William Shatner doing his famous Starman performance in the 1973 Hugo Awards or Nebula Awards. Rocket
It,
Man.
it's the
Oh yeah, Rocket
third.
Man.
It's
Yeah.
the third Shatner coming out is when I lose it every time. Like first one's good, second one's okay. The third one is just like, oh man, like Shatner, you've gone full Shat. This is so fantastic. No, I watch that on
Right.
bad days just to giggle. Um,
Right. But it all gets wrapped up in this sort of
yeah.
like almost like a word cloud of cultural touchstones that you just kind of assume are all part of the same thing, even though if you look at the primary sources, it wasn't wasn't there. But you know, it
So
was really fun to kind of put all of that into a cook pot and sort of like make people initially want to write this stuff off, but then actually by the end, the big reveal is they're the very people that you dismissed as being obsessive or silly or they got it all wrong actually retain the things that matter and they're the ones that save you, and that was important to me.
and
Because
it's
I was the Star Trek nerd that went to the conventions there was a long stretch of my life where I had to keep that secret lest I get mocked. And then
oh
in the end, but then in the end, it was I feel like that's the thing that saved me is that both the ideals that it came to represent of how to be a good person, but also the stories that I get to tell now in Star Trek or elsewhere are me paying that forward in a way of how do you sublimate the ideals of what and help give the next generation the tools they need to think critically and find the right way forward, even when it's not obvious. So that's I think that was all kind of floating around in my head as well.
and it's really a love letter to the fans in so many ways. Like the Enderprizians are those of us that Star Trek has become an ethos for. Like it is how
Yeah.
it's our humanism. It's how we treat others with respect. It's how we treat our world with respect. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how aware you are, but there is a huge Enterpriseian cosplay group that comes to Dragon Con every year.
Wow.
Huge.
I've seen some, I went to Trek to Vegas and there was a group of like 15 of them and I was like, this is my dream.
And it's what's great. Peter Capaldi, when he played the Doctor, he was very clear he wanted a costume that kids could pick up at, the Goodwill. Like it wouldn't
Yeah.
be this horribly expensive thing to cosplay. And that's the great part about the Enterpriseans uniforms too, is you can go to Target, buy a long sleeve green t-shirt, cut it up, sew it back together, and it costs you $10 to make a costume. Like it's an approachable way into cosplay too. And the makeup's not even that hard, especially you get some overtone, you put some green in your hair. Like it's so
Yeah.
doable. And it does kind of feel like the Thermians a little bit in Galaxy Quest in the best
Oh,
possible
sure.
way, where it's just like they love it so much it's become their identity. And
Yeah,
you
and
don't
I,
have to
you know,
hide
I
it anymore.
I love Galaxy Quest, and I think I am one of the many who says that it's one of the best Star Trek movies ever made. And I think that question did come up was like, are we just doing Galaxy
No,
Quest? It's like I don't think so,
not at all.
but I also like if this makes people want to go back and watch Galaxy Quest, all the better.
Yeah,
'Cause that's a great
absolutely.
film. Um, if anything, we kind of canonized Galaxy Quest in some small way, I guess.
Um, so with those nods back, Scotty comes out at one point in the play, hits his knees and like hollers, but you don't give him a slightly off name compared to the rest of them. Is it because Snotty was taken from Spaceballs or Welshie was used already in Futurama? Like, was that intentional that you didn't?
Well, if you look at the script, it is Scott apostrophe E,
Oh,
but
okay.
but
Cool.
when it's said out loud, it doesn't sound that different.
Yeah. You'd have to
Scott
Shatner
E.
it, right? Scott.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
And then was Chekov left out because he was left out of the animated series as well?
Well, Chekov was not in the original crew. He was
Right.
added later seasons,
I
and
I
then out
checked
of the
this.
animated.
I checked this. Obsession came out after Chekov was introduced.
Right.
So that's why I was just
So
kind of curious.
yeah, I think we left him out just because at a certain point
It's
we
just
could
too
only
hard.
build so many
Yeah.
models
Right.
as sort of self-referential and I guess sort of fan obsessive as this was, I didn't want it just to be a list of and then this and then this and this this and then
Yeah.
this. but I, leaving Chekov out, I was like, that's kind of fun because he wasn't in the animated
Yeah,
series and and he wasn't in the first season. So like
yeah.
so like um you could losing him or adding him was almost like another sort of
Oh
Easter
yeah,
eggy kind of thing.
absolutely. Oh my God. All right. Anything else about that particular episode that you'd like to discuss, or, a question you wish I'd asked you about it?
Gosh, it's I'm just glad that this episode is still engendering these sorts of discussions because
Good.
I it was I kept getting the really hard episodes to write just because I had the experience and I could see the way through the trees of how to do it. Like Kobayashi was an equally difficult episode to write because it was just sort of like this pastiche of a bunch of other Star Trek scenes all squished together to make that.
And yet didn't
But
feel like fan service. So good job. That no, like that episode works if you've never seen Star Trek. And that's a
yeah,
hard thing to do with something that has that many Easter eggs in it. So like, well done.
thanks. But yeah, so all the world's a stage. I think it was important to me just because I felt like for so long, Star Trek fans were sort of trodden upon, especially in the great, Star Wars versus Star Trek debate. Like Star Wars, in terms of sheer popularity, probably has won that battle. But, I think that Star Trek in some ways has like a deeper core ethos that I think resounds in ways that is maybe a little bit more profound. I think that I've met so many people that are in STEM or are in astrophysics or in science or are literally astronauts because they saw how you could be a good person but also be part of an institution that was striving for something greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's a so, just like Superman, sometimes people are like, "Oh, he's corny. He's all about truth, justice, and the American way." And I'm like, "What's wrong with those? Like, what's
Exactly.
wrong with being get like having values and value and prizing kindness as a not as a weakness but a strength?" Um, and I think in some ways, Star Trek embodies that too, where even when you're challenged on your beliefs, you still find a way to keep your North Star set on what is more important than maybe the letter of your dogmatic, beliefs that you grew up with, but rather the spirit of what they were made to employ, and that's really what this episode was about.
And that's where it really ends. I mean, that moment where you realize that the bridge of the protostar is holographic and you can just throw another bridge on top of it. I was just like I
Yeah,
lost it. Like it was like kind of honestly that moment in Picard season 3 when the D comes out and you're just like, and they did such a good job painstakingly putting that set back together. Like the animators put so much love into bringing us back that bridge again in a different way that if the enderprizians hadn't gotten the logs, if they hadn't made this the center of their ethos, if they hadn't practiced on little cardboard things to make it work, they all would have died in that episode. Like it wouldn't have gone the way they wanted. And
true.
and it's that faith. Like that whole episode is about hope. Really, at the end of the like, it really boils down to hope and dreams, and that's what Star Trek is. So
Yeah.
without the enterprizians,
And who
it wouldn't
and
work.
and who among us would not be if they were approached by somebody like, "Hey, guess what? Star Trek is real, and we need
I
your help
knew
on
it.
the bridge. Come with us." And I'd be like, "Yes, sir."
Yeah, really. I will be a red shirt. I know I've got 50-50 shot here. I don't even care. Right? Like,
Yeah, I'd probably be in the mess hall with Neelix, but it's fine.
nice. That's awesome. Oh, what would I do? Uh, yeah, probably mess hall too. Honestly, yeah, my family had restaurants. I grew up in a kitchen. I'd probably, but only if
Yeah. Well,
Tuvok was having his.
replicator food just doesn't taste the same. You gotta mess with it a little bit.
All right. Do you mind if I ask you just a couple broad questions about Prodigy while I've got
Yeah, it's
you?
fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, well, first, this is kind of like a thank you before it's a question. y'all's treatment of Chakotay was so brilliant in this because I've spent the last kind of 2.5 years slowly rewatching everything because I had missed some stuff along the years, and Chakotay I always felt like was a character that had so much potential that was just not tapped into narratively. They got so focused on his indigeneity and Jackie Marks screwing all of that up, and that's often what we talk about with Chakotay, and we forget he was really into archaeology. He liked boxing, like he had some secondary things, but he was never as fleshed out as, Will Riker or, Spock. So, one, thank you for giving him the depth that he deserved because, Beltran deserved that as well. Like, he really needed some meat, but, like, was it an intent to kind of revisit this character and give him more to do? Or did it just naturally evolve that way? Like, what were you
Yeah.
thinking?
I, it's not like we just plucked him out of a hat and said,
Right.
well, let's just use Chakotay. But it was more, it was when we realized that Janeway would be our way in to
Mm-hmm.
kind of to sorry, did I cut out? Am
Mm-mm,
I still here?
you're good.
When we realized that Janeway would be our way in to connect this sort of new Star Trek to old school Star Trek, and and she was in many ways perfect for that because she was the young captain who was thrust into the Delta Quadrant with a motley crew of like half Maquis raiders and half Starfleet officers who had never worked together, and then had to sort of assemble them into something that became the Voyager crew that made their way back to the Alpha Quadrant. We wondered like, well, who would be really important to Janeway that could be lost that she could go after, and it made sense to us to for her XO, and the relationship that she had with Chakotay made sense, especially if you watch all of Voyager, it is very clear that they have not just like an actor chemistry and a will they won't they energy, especially in the early seasons, but it's very clear that she relies on him as a confidant and she would do anything to bring him back, just as he's in Voyager had done several times, found ways to bring her back from the brink of death or destruction or dishonor. And so then that opened the question of like, well, Chakotay was not necessarily the best treated character. Are we up to the task? And I think as soon as we asked that question, we are like, well, I think we certainly can try. And we had a lot of really in-depth conversations about what went wrong on Voyager with the misrepresentation and of his ancestry, and then the backing off from that in a way that then they just kind of dropped that storyline completely, which I don't think is the best way to deal with representation, to just ignore it if you
Yeah.
can't get it right. But then also, also backed away from any sort of, they didn't want the implication that a commanding officer and her immediate underling were having a romantic thing. So then they backed off from him having any sort of personal relationship. And then so his character was kind of just left adrift, and they didn't know what to do with him. And so we kind of just stepped back and said, okay, what was there that wouldn't be that we could make not problematic, or would feel like more of a genuine continuation of what was real in their relationship and their character. And we realized that there was a path forward. And I think that had always stuck in my craw of one of the big things that Star Trek kind of got wrong. And if in any way we could take pains to try to heal some of those wounds, especially to the indigenous community, that I felt it was our obligation to try. And so we're very sensitive about that, but also like feel like I think as long as we don't really screw it up, if I think if anything, this could be like the start of a girders of rebuilding some of that trust that was lost with Jackie Marks and all of that. And sure enough, I was so heartened to see when we kind of we took pains, not like hit it over your head, but to give him like a proper ancestry and kind of and I was so happy when people who shared that ancestry saw that representation on screen that we'd added, and they said, I finally feel connected to this in a way that I have before, and my people are so rarely depicted on screen that it meant a lot to them, and so but I took that as a sign of like maybe we took a step in the right direction, and we were right in doing that.
And you didn't include all that weird stuff with Seven of Nine from those last couple episodes of Voyager, so thank you for that as well.
It's just weird, I think.
It's just like, oh man, and the consent issues with having him like on the holodeck. I've gone back and watched that from the perspective of consent. I'm like, this is so problematic. Why did nobody
Well, it's
talk
just
about this?
it's weird. It's weird insofar as like there's a holodeck simulation of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Then the next episode is just pretending like all of that actually happened
yeah.
between them. Which is what?
I mean, Worf and Deanna at least had a little bit of breadcrumbs if you really want to dig for them,
Yes.
but like, dude, Seven and Chakotay, like, ugh. Anyways, thank you for not including that. Uh,
Yeah.
and then just, I don't know if you're even allowed to answer this, so tell me not if you can't. What I really loved towards like that last episode of season two is that you all made it abundantly clear this show is part of canon. You brought in the destruction of Utopia Planitia, going right into Picard's season one events. And there's so many people who are like, the animated series don't count because they have this idea that, like you said, animation is a genre and not a medium. Was it intentional to really put in, no, this is part of the bigger story you've been seeing, and did you have an idea of where y'all were gonna maybe go with that?
Yes and yes. We knew from the beginning that maybe just out of naivete or hubris or whatever that we would always take extra pains to make this clear that this fits cleanly in with everything that you've seen in Star Trek canon. And our one of our staff writers, who I had already mentioned, Deandra Pendleton Thompson, was the writer's assistant on Picard season one.
Oh wow.
And so we knew from the early days, as we were even breaking the story for the first season, that having our show set in 2383, there was like we knew that Utopia Planitia was coming in 2385. And I think for some people, they might be like, oh, we're just not gonna deal with that. That's too serious. That's not real, or we'll just pretend like we just didn't get to that point in time. But that's not how the Hagemans or myself work. I think if anything, we were like that. I think the best stories involve momentous occasions of change, and given that the most that was largely treated in flashback of what that event was like, and at least as you saw it in Picard, we wanted to see boots on the ground, like, okay, this just as our heroes would sort of get into the academy, suddenly this big sea change would occur, and the ethos of Starfleet would become a lot more reactionary and pull back from the ideals that they had been yearning for this whole time, and then suddenly they're thrust into this very unique narrow window where they have managed to affect Starfleet in just such a way that they kept that light open as a beacon in the darkness. And we were like, that sounds like an amazing opportunity for like a new chapter in our show. I've never been afraid of canon, and I've never been afraid of big swings because I think, if a story stagnates too long, then it starts to make you question why the show exists at all. And I think even episodic shows like TOS and TNG, you see the characters evolve and be affected by what they experience. Whenever you saw that Resican flute come back, I was like, see, those episodes are connected. Picard still remembers that other lifetime he had an inner light. Um, and obviously, like the trauma with the Borg with Picard was a defining feature of him for season three onwards. but we were never afraid of connecting to it. And if anything, that was like a huge, exciting opportunity because I know people have different feelings about crossovers, but I can tell you one of the most exciting things about the shared universe of Star Trek was that you could have events that happen in one show affect or touch tails with another. And I loved it when Picard showed up at the beginning of Deep Space Nine, and then when Voyager launched from Deep Space Nine, or when Barclay made contact through the Project Edison or Project Watson to connect with Voyager and be the means by which they can bring them home. I think that holistic aspect was the most intriguing thing for me that made it feel like it all counted. And so it obviously if we couldn't find a way for it to make sense for our characters or our arcs, we would have de-emphasized or emphasized it more. But I think in the course of our show, it actually slotted in perfectly. And and even Wesley Crusher, for instance, the crossovers we had between Picard and our show, um, we wouldn't have done it if it didn't feel like an organic sort of cohabitation, I guess. And it was an opportunity to kind of bridge all of these together and show we were thinking about these things the same way that the Berman era was. And so it was a really special opportunity for all of us to collaborate with a lot of other amazing storytellers and find a way to connect it all together.
Man, Wes coming back and in the way that Wes Crusher came back. Like, for one thing, I wish that the Doctor could be American because he would be the best Doctor Who ever based on the way he played that role. Like, he had that wonderfully, like, David Tennant frenetic energy that actually still really works with where Wes came from. He just gets to be fully Wes now. He doesn't have to apologize for his nerdiness. Nobody's going to yell at him to shut up anymore. Like, he gets to be Wes Crusher. And the best thing I feel bad for my downstairs neighbor and my dogs that they woke up in that moment, but like at the very end of what, oh crap, I wrote it down. Is it the Devourer of All Things? Was that
Yeah.
yeah, the Devourer of All Things, that end of part one where you see the apartment for just a second. I just literally screamed the top of my lungs. And, it's just those little things where, again, if you've never watched Star Trek, it doesn't matter. If you've watched Star Trek, you're like, that's the backdoor pilot for the Roddenberry show that didn't work out. No, 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 and it's just, it was these little exciting nuggets that reminded you, yeah, this is part of a whole universe. This isn't in a vacuum. It's, it's not siloed over on Nickelodeon doing its own thing. Like, this is our universe. And we get to show it to a whole new audience. So thank you for doing that for us and all the writers and all the showrunners and whatnot. But I mean, you were a big part of it. So thank you.
Well, our pleasure.
All right. Lightning round questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Captain Kirk or Captain Picard?
Gosh, I waffle back and forth, but as of this morning, Picard.
I'm sorry. The answer was Archer, actually. So you got
Hey,
Archer.
I am a Scott Bakula fan through and through, so that can't go wrong.
I'm the weirdo that Enterprise is my favorite series, and I'll stand it forever because it's the same kind of thing with Prodigy. What do you do when people don't know what Starfleet is? Enterprise is, what do you do when there's no prime directive? That's a
Yeah,
fascinating entry point into what we do. So story
sure.
wise, it's always been my favorite. All right, Ballad of Bilbo Baggins by Leonard Nimoy or Shatner's cover of Rocket Man?
All right. A long time ago in the land of Shire comes a brave little hobbit who we all admire.
I
It's
think that
got to
might.
be that one,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, and there was that Lord of the Rings movie To Rule Them All too, like that, like a flash animation when we
Yeah,
were in college that just inserted that in the
yeah.
Lord of the Rings for no reason, and it was just like I still watch that.
Bilbo, Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins. He's only 3 feet tall. It's so good.
And then the hippie chicks show up for like no reason, and they're just like, Oh, that's
Yeah,
so it's like
I actually did, before that Flash animation, I was such a nerd that I still
oh
because it was like, wait, Star Trek and Lord of the Rings crossed over, ah,
I,
and then
I'd
I was
I'd found it
like,
on LimeWire originally, so yeah, I'm right there with you too. It's like,
yeah.
what is this? Nimoy sings songs? What?
I
Yeah.
found the like in the, just showing my age. I was at a LAN party, and somehow through that the grand passing
Mhm.
of the secret documents, so, someone was like, "Here, you got to," just like sent me the file, and I opened it up. It was the music video, the original one from the '70s that he shot of him just like in the desert singing, and then there were people dressed as like hokey hobbits popping out, going Bilbo Baggins. It was great.
Oh, he fought with the goblins. Do, do, do. And like just it's just so beautiful. All right. So given that it's been such a contentious thing the last year, which Gorn is the best Gorn? TOS, Enterprise, or Strange New Worlds?
I think I'm a classicist on this one. I love the man in the rubber suit. Maybe it's just like the kaiju Godzilla fan in me.
Yeah.
I love the guy that can barely see and just clearly sweating his ass off, throwing the fake rocks. Like I love TOS Gorn. I love him so much.
And you guys got that into all the world of stage. Like you got the fake like judo chop like
Oh
fighting
yeah,
even into that scene.
what they call Kirk Fu.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
so good. Oh, yeah. All right. Sybok, great Vulcan or greatest Vulcan?
I mean, I I don't know about greatest, but he's certainly a great Vulcan. I love Sybok.
Do you know it was originally supposed to be Connery?
Yes, I did. I think I did. And then the I forget the new actor's name stepped in and just nailed
Luck
it.
and Bill. There.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, Lawrence Luckinbill.
Yeah. And that's why Shakari is Sean Connery, the
I
planet.
actually forgot that.
Yeah.
That you reminded me of that. That's so crazy.
So good. And yeah, well, we got, Connery for Last Crusade. That was the movie he did in lieu of. So like in terms
Oh,
of his
really? I didn't know that.
that was
Well,
he had
okay.
just yeah. So like
Well,
I
I'll take that trade-off because that's one of my favorite movies.
oh yeah, and Luck and Bill is so good too. So like,
Dog Indiana.
excluding Galaxy Quest, what non-Trek media feels the most Trek to you?
What non-Trek, excluding Galaxy Quest, what non-Trek media feels the most Trek? How interesting. I mean, I guess it would be oh God, I'm blanking on the name.
Orville?
Oh my brain. Thank you, the Orville. Yes.
Season three, especially. Season three is some of the
I tell
best
people like
sci-fi
people who
out
haven't
there.
seen, when I tell people who haven't seen season three, I was like, he stops trying to be funny. It just becomes Star Trek.
and and good Star Trek. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like they've got so many costume designers and people from the Berman era like influencing over there too. That yeah, it just became Star Trek and
Yeah.
rip your heart out Star Trek on top of it. All right, favorite one-liner from any Star Trek film or television episode.
Favorite one-liner
Yeah,
from um I mean there's definitely some witty ones, but the ones that always stick with me are the just like the weird ephemera. Like for some reason when you say like what's your favorite quote from Star Trek, my brain immediately goes to Data going, it's green.
yes, exactly.
Like it's not even that like I mean it's funny if you know the context,
Right.
but I think maybe just because it's part of one of my favorite crossover episodes, Relics, and which in turn is a callback to an episode from TOS where
Scotty's all like completely shithouse.
yeah,
It's like it's
Scotty goes through
green.
all of his whiskey trying to get this alien drunk, and then he just finds this bottle of green stuff and says the exact same line.
Do you ever read Relics? Because the novelization is amazing.
You know, I haven't, but I'm
Worth
sure
it.
it is.
Worth it. Worth it. Is if there was one Trek episode you could change in a marked way, which would it be and why?
I mean, it's hard not to say Code of Honor
Just
because
take it
so
off.
many,
It's too easy.
so many ways that could have been better. Um, I
Running it through a shredder might have been the way to make it as good as it was gonna get.
yeah. Um, I think Threshold actually was not that bad of an episode. Insofar,
Threshold.
insofar as I think the only thing it really got wrong was the reason why he was mutating. I
Yeah.
think, I think maybe I just have like a fascination with body horror episodes because I think Genesis 2 is sometimes a maligned TNG episode
Mhm.
of where they have the retrovirus that starts mutating them into like animal people.
Oh, poor Barkley.
Right. Right. But I think just because they explained it as like you're hyper evolving, a lot of scientists it didn't like that. But I think if they just had that he was hyper mutating, I think that the idea that you going breaking the warp barrier can have some weird effects on your DNA at a quantum level could have been a slightly better explanation, and it was pretty. I think it's actually a pretty good episode except for that element.
And
That's all.
McNeil
So I
is
would change that.
McNeil's phenomenal in it too. I mean, like that's
Oh
so
yeah,
effective.
it's
And the makeup isn't doing the work. He's doing the work underneath it as
no,
well.
it's like The Fly. Like it's great.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
It's
I'm glad I'm not the only
yeah.
person that's like, why is everybody complaining about this episode? It's exploring some really interesting places even. Yeah.
I think the problem is instead of using science, it uses what my fellow Star Trek writer Shauna Benson calls schmiance, where it has the feeling of science, but actually is totally wrong.
Okay. And then finally, what's your favorite red shirt death?
Favorite redshirt death? I mean, it's hard to beat the Horta going over the dude, and then he's just a skeleton behind it. That's so classic. I also really love the episode where there's just I forget the episode, but he's running through like an ion storm, and then he goes, and then a lightning bolt strikes him, and he just and then he just slowly evaporates, like he just goes translucent and then disappears. It's so good.
And you mentioned earlier death by cloud. That one's always pretty
Yes.
good too. So,
Dicronium Cloud Creature is a good one too. But that one was like he just kind of like and then they were like gray, and I was like,
yeah.
I like it when it's really insane. There's another one too where a guy's just running and then he trips on like a landmine and just explodes. It's so good.
The best part is, I mean, we've put red shirting on there. We've retconned that as a thing,
Yeah.
and I've always wondered if they were sitting there going, "Can we think of even dumber ways to kill these guys?" Or if it was just writer of the week came up with it, and that's just what it was. Because
Yeah.
yeah, the Horta. There's no answer other than the Horta. I mean, like you get
The
eaten by
Horda
a
I think is
of
the best.
pizza. Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
also kind of partial to Galileo 7,
Oh, that's a good one.
where the whole episode is just Spock saying, "It's fine. They died, but it's irrelevant." As like these giants are throwing spears at them and just like impaling them one by one, like, "Please, Spock, do something." And he was like, "Irrelevant."
Like cold, man. Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron, you have been really generous with your time, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for actually responding to my email and making this time. And yeah, good luck with your future
Hey,
projects. Where can people
my
find you
pleasure.
if they're wondering? Where are you online? What are you doing now?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much on all social media, more active on some than others, as you need to be these days. But you can find me at Good Aaron, GOODAARON, and I try to keep people up to date on anything I find interesting or my upcoming projects. So if you want to know what I'm up to, or just say hello, or talk about Star Trek or whatever you want with me, feel free to at me on all the socials.
Excellent. Would you be worried about the fact that people might find man of most shirts if they do that?
Not really. I'm
Awesome.
proud of that.
I found that and I was like, this is the exact kind of crap we were doing in college because the internet wasn't quite there yet and we had no streaming. So like, what else were you gonna do in the middle of the night but put on
Yeah.
all the shirts in your room? So
For the uninitiated, I did break the Guinness World Record for most T-shirts worn at once by
and you
in
held it
college.
till 2019.
Yeah, I held it for like at least better part of a year, and then some guy in you know what it was? It was the Big Brother Belgium. You know the reality show Big Brother, where they're all in
Yeah.
a house. The Belgian edition of Big Brother. Um, came out with a challenge to stay in the house was to break the Guinness World Record of Aaron John Waltke of Bloomington, Indiana. And I
That's
found that in a
hysterical.
Dutch TV guide. I was like my name, it was like my name interspersed in Dutch, and I was like, "What's this?" And I put it in Google Translate. I was like, "No!"
That's brilliant. Oh my God, I love
Yeah,
it. You never know what you put out into the ether that's going to be picked up and taken in a direction you may not
yeah,
expect. So,
exactly. And it may change over time, but as long as the spirit is there, that's
exactly.
all that
Full circle. Well done. You're like a professional or something. Good job.
matters.
Well, thank you again, Aaron. It was lovely to meet you and good luck with your life. You're
Thank
doing good
you.
so far. Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.